Hi, I'm Skater Bob, and I'm here today with Gary Kuhn and Sonny Vergara. And both of these gentlemen have interesting stories themselves as individuals, but also stories as long-term friends, and they're continuing their relationship today. So I'm going to just ask them to tell us about their personal history and their joint history together, especially related to water and natural resources in Florida, Citrus County, and other counties in Florida.
Well, I'm Gary Kuhn, and my history as just an individual, as a young person, junior high, high school period, very fortunate in life to have had parents that were outdoorsy folks. We spent a lot of time in a boat. We spent a lot of time traveling from St. Petersburg up to Cedar Key and other places that in those days were still pretty remote and maybe not much populated. So from that, I enjoy a real love, I guess is the right word, for the outdoors and for a natural environment. Again, briefly, but the long story short is I went back at a later age and got a master's degree in environmental engineering and went to work for the Southwest Florida Water Management District. Thoroughly enjoyed the work. It was directed by the governor and the legislature in those days, and they were genuinely interested in helping to preserve our water supply for the long term, protecting areas that were environmentally sensitive. During my years, former Governor Graham was there and Governor Martinez, and both of them, two different parties, loved the state of Florida to the extent that they wanted to protect it and make sure that we had plenty of water for the future. Well, anyway, we've known each other for over 40 years, and we both love nature and photography, and we've enjoyed aggravating each other for that many years and having a good time. Sonny.
Well, I got started in, my story is a whole lot different from Gary's. I grew up in Brooksville, which is the hometown for the Southwest Florida Water Management District. But when I grew up, that was not in existence. And I grew up, my first experience with nature was through the Boy Scouts. And then I grew up, went away, went to school, went in the military, finished my schooling out in Southern California, and none of that involves the environment or concerns for the environment. I couldn't tell you a water pump from an engine pump. But what happened was, when I got out of the Marine Corps, there was a buddy of mine that I went to the first grade through the 12th grade with, named Jake Varn. He was working at the Southwest Florida Water Management District, and this was in late 71 and 72, early 72. So his father was a legislator, so he was popular around Brooksville. The family was popular around Brooksville. So when I got back in town, I didn't know Jake was out there, but his father was in Bacon's drugstore in Brooksville. I go walking by Bacon's drugstore, just new in town, back after 10 years being gone. I hear this rap on the window, and I look in there, and there's Jake's father, and he's signaling for me to come in. So I go in there, and he says, "Have you seen Jake yet?" They call him Little Jake because he's Big Jake. "Have you seen Little Jake?" "No, I haven't seen him in 10 years. He says, "Go out to that water place out on 41. He's out there." So I called, and I go out there, and make the long story short, Jake is now a lawyer out there. He started as just a draftsman, went to the University of Florida, got his engineering degree, and then went back got his law degree, and now he's out there as a lawyer. So he says, "Well, come on in here. I want you to meet the executive director," and that was Dale Twatman. Dale Twatman was a helicopter pilot at one time, but he was an engineer and spent a short time in the military flying helicopters. Well, I just got out of the Marine Corps, and I was flying helicopters. So I go in and talk to him, and we talked for an hour about our experiences with helicopters. And then at the end of that, he says, "Hey, you want a job?" And I said, "Well, No, because I didn't want to come back to my hometown. So I went away for about a year, and then circumstances made me rethink my decision. So I came back, called up Dale, and said, yeah, look, I'd like to get involved. So that was the beginning of me becoming aware of water management issues and environmental issues. And to his credit, Dale's credit, he knew that I didn't know anything about it. But I could talk, I could write, and he said, look, this is what you need to do. We've got a library of reports here, engineering reports, water reports, drainage reports. You spend every spare minute in there reading those reports. And in the meantime, my job was to help these two biologists who had been assigned to by Dale to write the first environmental impact statement that the Corps of Engineers was going to use in the state of Florida. That environmental impact statement was for the Tampa Bypass canal, which was under construction. The Water Management District was a local sponsor of that federal project. That's why the district was involved. So I'm writing that I'm helping these two biologists. They came up with the technical requirements, meeting the technical requirements, and then I would take it and put it in English, and language. So that's the way I began learning about the environment. And then I just went through the next 7 years, and through Dale left, and then it was Don Feaster was the executive director. And positions opened up, and I was just lucky. I kept being in the right place at the right time. My knowledge expanded, and that was really the beginning of it. That was 7 years training, 7 years exposure to the water problems in the state of Florida. Interestingly, that was from 72 to 77. That's 5 years. And at the end of during that 5 years was when the Water Resources Act of 72 was passed. I was involved with Buddy Blaine, going up to Tallahassee, assisting him. I didn't have anything to do with it other than follow him around, but I learned a tremendous lot about the legislature and what laws were being passed. The Water Resources Act of 72 was a monumental, enormously impactful law that affected how the state was going to manage its water systems in the future. So then other laws were passed over the next 3 years. They had a major constitutional amendment giving the Water Management District's property tax authority. So the water management districts became entities, very powerful entities to regulate, but also to enter contracts to do things, to actually accomplish water management things, water management projects, in concert with the local governments as partners. So that's how I got involved. Gary and my path crossed many times. When I left Swiftmud, the Water Management District, Southwest Florida Water Management District, I actually went to Tallahassee because by that time my buddy Jake Varn had become the Secretary of DER. So he said, Sonny, I need somebody to come up here and coordinate between the five water management, there's 5 water management districts. So you come up here and that'll be your job. So I went up there for a year, and then after that year, I got selected to be the executive director of the St. John's district. That was, going from the frying pan into the fire, because there were a lot of issues up there, and that's a whole different story. But when I went up there, I needed an assistant executive director. It didn't have one. So I called Gary, and I says, hey, come up here, you can be my assistant executive director. And he says, okay, I'll think about it. Well, between the time he said I'll think about it and the next time I talked to him, the executive director of Southwest Florida Water Management District had committed suicide. So the chairman of the board, who was, what the chairman of the board when you got your job as executive director? Bruce Sampson.
Bruce Sampson, yes.
Bruce Sampson.
Yes.
So Bruce tapped him to be the executive director of Swiftmud, and that took him out of being my assistant executive director up at St. John's. So our paths go back and forth. Gary's had so many really exciting jobs. He's been, you can talk about it, Gary, but he's been county administrator. He's been huge jobs in several counties here and in Hernando County. So anyway, why don't you talk about those things?
My first job at Southwest Florida Water Management District, I was in the engineering planning section. They sent me up to Yankeetown for a meeting regarding the bypass canal, not bypass, but the canal to be cut across the state of Florida so that boats had a shortcut.
Barge Canal, Cross Florida Barge Canal.
Cross Florida Barge Canal. Sent me to a meeting. I was not really a participant. I was to take notes. And shortly thereafter, the legislature determined that that project needed to be shut down because of saltwater intrusion. So that was my very first assignment. And from there, as Sonny points out, I became a director and there, and that was in 82, along in there somewhere. Long story short there too. I'm so proud of that group in that they got the Green Swamp, which is the headwaters for 4 major rivers in Florida, and also the groundwater flows radial out from the Green Swamp. They had the area, they determined that it should be an area of critical state concern, which highly protected. It was a source, major source of drinking water. They did a number of things. Representative Nancy Argenziano, who you may or may not remember, but she's still in contact with us.
I'm sure a lot of people remember her.
I bet they do. She got a law passed, and this was she was a House of Representatives legislator. She got a law passed because at that time, St. Pete, Pinellas County, Hillsborough County, Pasco County, they were all sending pipelines. They never quite made it up here, but they came Crossbar Ranch Wellfield as an example.
Yes,
so they're sucking the water out from rural counties for their people who, of course, at that time numbered millions of people. Ms. Argenziano got a law passed that you had to use all of your local sources first. Among them, at that time, I was the regulatory director at the Water Management District, all the permitting and whatnot. They hired me from Hillsborough County to come down, and I had to write the condition in their permit that required them to investigate a desal plant in Hillsborough County. So Hillsborough County hired me to come help them get the permit to do the desal plant. It was just nothing real high level, technical. There were only 2 of us working on that. But we got the permit through SWIFMA, DEP, to do the desal plant. The idea was it's very much more expensive than regular groundwater. The idea was if you were going to water in the dry months of the year, you needed to switch over to desal, more expensive, but if you needed to water your lawn, you were going to pay for it. And it's worked out fine. They built it alongside the cooling towers of Tampa Electric down there with the idea that the salt water would be blended with the outflow of the cooling towers to dilute the salt and not ruin the environment in that area. So as he points out, I've somehow that particular it was just a luck thing. They had hired the county administrator that I worked for in Citrus County as the public works director, Tony Shoemaker. He got fired up here. He went to Hillsborough County as their assistant, so he hired me to go down and work on the desal plant. Anyway, I tell you, I loved my career. Met a lot of great people, and I think.
Let me expand a little bit about that desal plant.
What's that?
Let me expand on the desal plant. That's significant to Citrus County because, well, you might not think so, but it is in this regard. It was built. Well, let me back up just a little bit. The Southwest Florida Water Management District and its regulatory responsibilities has permitting and control authority over the pumping of water that was coming out of Northwest Hillsborough and going to Pinellas County, City of St. Petersburg, Tampa, that region, that Tampa thirsty region, was getting water from these well fields in Pasco and northwest Hillsborough. Well, it was draining the swamps and the wetlands and everything else. And so they sued the Water Management District because they needed their permits, and they wanted to increase the withdrawals for those permits because they were growing. That's when I arrived at the district, right in the middle of that. It was probably, they had been litigating for over 20 years that I was aware of. So the way it was resolved was that if they would reduce their pumping in northwest Hillsborough, then the Water Management District would help fund, and we did fund. I think the total was $120 million, something like that. But that triggered an expansion of the Tampa Bay water system under the new water organization called Tampa Bay Water. It was the West Coast Regional Water Supply Authority. It became Tampa Bay Water, and all the governments agreed they would reduce the pumping up there, but the Water Management District would help them get alternative water supplies. One of those alternative water supplies was to take surface water instead of groundwater from the Tampa Bypass canal and the Aquifer River. And we'd put a desal plant, and the district would provide $85 million to help build that plant. Cash. After it was built and it was operating, we would help them pay for it. So they built it, and the result was, these are extraordinary numbers, but they reduced their pumping in northwest Hillsborough and Pasco County, and those well fields that were just draining the wetlands and the lakes in that area. It's a beautiful area of lakes and wetlands. They reduced their pumping by 63 million gallons a day, and they agreed to reduce the permitting requirement by 93 million gallons per day. That was an extraordinary thing to happen. It was historic. But as a result of that, we helped them we gave them the land for the Bill Young Reservoir, which provided them the ability to put a 15 billion gallon reservoir in Hillsborough County with water from the Aquifer, excess water, flood water, from the surface water systems in Hillsborough County. I mention all that because it's what's happening today. As a matter of fact, this happened back in the 70s and 80s. Today, here we are now 25 years into this century, they're looking for more water. I heard the other day, this is like within the last 6 months, that they have proposed a well field at the southeast corner of the boundaries of Hernando County. That's close. And so this idea that Nancy Argenziano came up, local sources first, is what's keeping them at bay. And if that ever gets weakened, that concept, that thought, then they're going to be stepping into Hernando County and eventually Citrus County, because the water up here, the groundwater system is still not as stressed as it is down there. So this is great. And that's the cheapest water you can get is groundwater, fresh water. So it's a thing that Citrus County and Hernando County needs to be very, very concerned about, and keeping an eye on what's happening down with Tampa Bay water.
Well, I want to add that I seldom say really nice things about Sonny, but he and another gentleman were responsible and should be given great credit. Back in the day, St. Petersburg owned the Weeki Wachee River area there.
The spring, all the acreage around the spring.
Yeah. He and the gentleman, Fritz Musselman, who is the real estate, were able to get that turned into a state park where they would no longer have ownership. And I think that was a key element in those days, keeping those areas out of our area.
Yeah.
That would have been a huge thing to pump water from the Weeki Wachee. That would have been a huge problem, in my opinion.
Listen, the city of St. Petersburg bought the 460 acres around the spring in 1932 in anticipation of needing water in the future. So they had a spring that flows at a 100, cubic feet?
I don't remember that number.
I think it's 63 million gallons a day is what the spring flows at. It's not near what it does up here, but it's still, that's a lot of water. beautiful river, beautiful spring, and they bought all the land around it in anticipation of being able to take that water and ship it to St. Petersburg in Pinellas County. So it's been a thorn in Hernando County's side from day one, from 1932, especially up now when the water war started in the 70s. That was a big problem. So what happened was, this is the Fritz Musselman story. I was executive director of Swift Mud, and I heard a rumor that the city of St. Petersburg was interested in selling the property around the spring because they knew that legislatively this local sources first concept was in play, and it would be very difficult politically for them to come up and get this water and pipe it south. So they were talking about, whispering it, about selling it and taking the money and doing something else with it. So I heard the rumor, and I talked to Fritz. I said, Fritz, you go down there and find out what's going on. Fritz was the land acquisition manager for the Southwest Florida Water Management District. And to Fritz's credit, he acquired hundreds of thousands of acres under the Save Our Rivers program. That was his job. He did a fantastic job at that. So sent him down to St. Petersburg. They were having some sort of meeting, and he asked around, and he came back and said, sure enough, they're thinking about selling it. So it was a little bit complicated because the city of St. Petersburg had entered a contract with some guy to run the Weeki Wachee Mermaid Show. So that was a separate operation. So that had to be taken care of. It just so happened, I don't know if you knew this or not, but Jake Varn was representing that guy that owned that show business that was running Weeki Wachee. So Jake and I and Fritz got with the people in St. Petersburg, and all working together, we worked out a deal so that the 460 acres would be sold to the Water Management District under the Save Our Rivers program, and I think it was $16 million is what we paid for it. And in the meantime, the guy with the contract to run the show and own the show there at Weeki Wachee would be able to continue it under Swift Mud's land ownership. But what happened is he eventually decided he didn't want to do it anymore, and that's when we got the state interested. Swift Mud got the state interested in it becoming a state park, and eventually that happened. So that's the background to how that happened. So it's pretty interesting, and it all feeds back to Nancy Argenziano and Local Sources First, and the growing, continuing, and even today need for cities and counties to be able to get more water to feed the people that are coming to Florida at the rate of 1,000 people a day. It's amazing. It's difficult. It's interesting.
Well, a little more of my younger years and what I think played a big role in me getting into this kind of business and being concerned about our environment and water supply. I mentioned already I was the Nature Lodge guy at Scout Camp. And it was up in Camp Sewell, there in Pinellas County. And as I say, I did that for 5 years, but in those days, and this comes back to our photography too, I taught all the nature, wildlife management, forestry merit badges, okay? The scouts that came up would spend 1 to 2 weeks, and I had all the responsibility to train, to teach them in the merit badges. So every year we did that. Before camp started, we had a little concrete pit, and we would go down before camp started with a flashlight in your mouth to the waterfront and look for the red eyes of the alligators. So when you did that, you hoped it was a guy about this big. Which they were right up on where the arena was for the Wednesday night show.
I heard you would actually grab them.
I'm getting ready to tell that story. So you shine it. You could see the little gator was 2 to 3 feet long, and so you had the light in your mouth, and you're trying to shine it right in his eyes so he can't see you. And they lay still. You got to snatch him behind the neck. I've still got little bite marks where I was not successful. But we would put those in the tank for the Boy Scouts to see up close what an alligator looked at. We would capture 4 or 5 pygmy rattlesnakes, and one time we had a diamondback that we put in a glass cage so the scouts would know what one looked like, so they would avoid it. And so we had a display of all the different critters. We had I'll never forget, and then I'm going to turn it back to the man here, but I'll never forget we had I believe it was a great blue heron that was clearly injured. And he was limping around the whole area there, got up in a tree, he didn't like us, of course. I climbed the tree, got the great blue heron. We kept him for 2 weeks and he was okay. So
You climbed the tree?
I climbed the tree. Yes, the answer is yes. I think both of us are still involved. The nature photography thing sounds a little silly or maybe obsessive or whatever, but I truly believe that with his and my activity with these photos, people are more aware of those things perhaps than they would otherwise be. It may not be a great difference, but he just got literally hundreds of hits on one of his pictures. Every now and then I'll get that many, but I think it makes people more aware of what we have and what we're losing in a lot of places. I actually served after I retired as the Save Crystal River director. I'll be honest with you, they were really looking for somebody more that was computer oriented on keeping track of all the money and everything. I did that for about a year, enjoyed it. Most of the, quote, vacations that go on somehow are on the water somewhere. And I think both Sonny and I, when we're asked to speak publicly, I do a presentation on the wild things of Florida. But typically tied into that are water resources. You got a wading bird over here, and I'll tell the story. This old boy was up in the green swamp and still protected by the state, etc. So I think we both try to do that, and I enjoy doing that. So
I think anybody that is involved in Florida's natural systems and wanting to see them maintained forever need to pay attention to what's happening politically, because since the year 2000 there has been a concerted effort to reduce the regulatory structure that was put into place over 50 years, going back to the early 70s, which I mentioned earlier. There were laws passed then that began to provide protection for natural systems. And over the next 50 years up until today, those up until 10 years ago, those laws were in effect. And that encompasses all the years when everything was big, the environmental concerns of the country and the world were heightening up to a high level. And now that heightened environmental concern for natural systems is being fought. It's being actually attacked by politics. So the regulators are now, being decimated. The rules that authorize the regulation of those systems are being changed to allow greater impacts on it. And it's happening, and it's happening at a faster and faster rate. And today it's a big problem. If anybody's concerned about the natural systems in the state of Florida and whether or not they're going to be available for their children and their children's children, they need to pay attention to what's going on, because it is being impacted. If you look at the number of rooftops being put in the ground in Citrus County, Pasco County, it's incredible. Every hill, it seems, is being flattened, and rooftops are being put in there. These houses are 2-story, some of them. They're long, we used to call them shotgun houses, because you can look in this end and see out the other, shoot a shotgun through it. But they're long, modern houses, and they're 15 feet apart. And there's hundreds of them going in these 500-acre, 1,000-acre tracts everywhere. All that's going to translate into an increasing demand for water, and sewage and streets and everything else that's associated with development, which is great if you're in that business and you want to make a lot of money, but it's not great for natural systems. So it's going to be extremely important that the young people pay attention to the politics and the nature of those politics, to use a word, because it's changing.